Hello, and welcome back to another insightful episode on all things coaching in higher education. I'm your host, Tim Jansa, a certified leadership and organizational development coach and a higher ed professional of almost 20 years. I'm joined today by my fellow leadership coach, Dr. Jennifer Brown, who is the CEO and founder of Northstar Consulting and an experienced higher ed leader and administrator. When I asked Jennifer which topic from her vast arsenal of experiences she would like to discuss today, she immediately homed in on two aspects of leading a modern organization that really don't get nearly as much attention as they probably ought to. First, appreciating organizations as highly complex organisms, and second, building trust between a wide range of stakeholders as the foundation of any change initiative. So let's dig in and learn from an expert how coaches can help leaders build trust in the complex environments of their colleges and universities. Welcome to the program, Jennifer. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you, Tim. It is so great to be here. I've spent over 20 years in higher education, including serving as a professor, a dean, and provost, and now as a leadership coach. And one thing that has become crystal clear to me is that colleges and universities are incredibly complex environments. You're not just working with one type of stakeholder, you're balancing the expectations of students, of faculty, of staff, governing boards, legislators, alumni, community partners, each with their own priorities and power dynamics. So that complexity makes trust the cornerstone of effective leadership and meaningful change. And so that's why I'm excited to talk to you today.
I love how you position trust as the cornerstone of leadership and change. So let's just start with that. Let's start with trust, since it's so central to our discussion. Now, we all have kind of studied our theories, and when I hear the word trust, my mind immediately goes to Patrick Lencioni's framework of the five dysfunctions of a team, where trust is the foundational principle needed for any kind of team or organization to function at a high level. So, from your perspective, what makes trust building uniquely challenging in complex environments like colleges and universities? And how do you address these challenges as a coach?
Yes. Well, first, I'll just say I was pointing right here because that's exactly what's on my shelf, right? It's Patrick Lencioni. But you're absolutely right, Tim. Trust is foundational. And what makes higher education unique is that trust has to extend across silos and through multiple layers of governance and culture. So, in a corporate environment, you may have a clear hierarchy and decision making process. But in higher ed, you're working in shared governance systems with faculty senates, student voices, staff unions, external accreditors, and these are all influencing decision holders, right? That means leaders can't just rely on positional authority. They need relational authority, and trust is earned by consistently showing up with transparency, listening deeply, aligning words with actions. And as a coach, I help leaders slow down enough to map out who their key stakeholders are, what matters most to these stakeholders, where trust already exists, or where it has been fractured. And we then work on strategies to rebuild or strengthen the trust, which includes consistent communication, early engagement in decision making, demonstrating the people's input genuinely shapes these outcomes. So, in other words, we move from compliance to commitment, and in environments as complex as universities, that shift makes all the difference in whether change actually takes hold.
I love how you framed it from as a shift from compliance to commitment. And ultimately, it's a commitment to people and not just the processes and not just the procedures and policies and so forth. And I'm also really glad that you brought up the dichotomy of positional authority versus relational authority. Because in higher ed, what I have found so many people, they focus solely on the positional authority and they just expect to be trusted. They expect to be respected because they have a certain degree and they have a certain title and all these things. And I think that is so prevalent, especially on the faculty side. But I mean, staff is, of course,
Yeah.
very, very similar. So to make a distinction there of where does authority actually come from and the claim to trust. Now, you mentioned some strategies that you can apply to help leaders build credibility and trust with faculty and staff and students, which of course are three very different groups of stakeholders. What are some of these strategies, and what's your experience with them?
Yeah. So I like to think about three building blocks: consistency, competence, and care. So, consistency is about following through on commitments, both small and big. And as you know, looking for those small wins is one of the, most important and immediate things that we can do. But the second part is called competence, and that's demonstrating a deep understanding of the academic mission and of the challenges. And if you're not sure, you're coming in from an external environment, having the opportunity to understand that landscape is going to be very important. The third is care, and it's about showing genuine concern for people's experiences and well being. So, thinking about sharing regular updates on key initiatives. A lot of people think you're the leader, I tell you, and then you do. But the art of moving people along to a place where they actually want to follow you is helping them understand the why, holding small group listening sessions with faculty and staff, naming and appreciating contributions publicly. And for those who maybe don't want that public recognition, understanding enough of how they're motivated so that you can recognize them in a way that they can appreciate. So I'm encouraging leaders to start with small actions, quick wins that signal integrity and build a pattern of reliability.
It's almost like a 3C framework, right? Something I'm very familiar
Yes.
with in a different context. With consistency, something else that comes to mind for me is this issue of the espoused values that are listed on a website and in job postings, right? But then the actual lived values, the things that actually drive everyday interaction amongst colleagues. And I think there's sometimes such a huge gap. I've had seen it so many times when you look at a job description, it's like, oh, we're like a family, which to me always raises red flags, by the way, if somebody calls work family, because it's not, right? But I think that falls or aligns pretty well with the consistency part, because it's not just about living the real values, but also doing so consistently. As far as competence concerned, that of course is the one thing that people generally gravitate to, but they assume competence because of a degree, because of subject matter expertise, and not necessarily competence in interacting with people, right? And I think that is such a
Yes.
blind spot of so many leaders, especially those who come from the professoriate, because again, during that tenure track pathway, leadership is generally not front and center. And then you mentioned care. I have to bring up again one of my favorite books that is currently making some waves out there is The Caring University by Kevin McClure. And
Yeah.
I think that the idea of caring is just such an important aspect because you also want to keep people, you want to retain people. But again, if
That's
people
right.
don't trust that the institution has their back, that their leaders have their back, that they can flourish and that they should be spending an extended period of their life, their working life at that institution, I guess then there's an issue. So what I'm really getting at is that there is really this gap, sometimes this chasm between
Hmm.
trust gaps, let's call it, right, where leaders expect, or they're just like, I can be trusted, I can do this, I can do that, but they don't understand that trust is also a function of a systemic issue, or lack of trust is almost a systemic issue. I see you
Yeah.
nodding, so that are you, does that resonate with you?
It so resonates with me. I will share that one of the things that I focus on, not because I want to, but because my clients bring it up, is authenticity and vulnerability. And so back here also is a book by Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, right? Which talks a lot about, how do you show up as an authentic leader? When you talk about trust gaps, Tim, these are the invisible fractures where people feel excluded, where they're dismissed, they're unheard. And a lot of what I do also, whether it's through coaching or facilitated retreats, both offline, in person, and online, is helping get those voices heard in the room. So many times we have people who have expertise, knowledge, their boots on the ground. No one ever asks them, anything about what would help the organization. And when you get to learn some of the things of what's standing in the way or keeping us from achieving the goals, um, it really comes from the ability of hearing folks, and then as the leader, sifting out information, and tying that to the goals. But let me share, some of the coaching approaches that I use for addressing trust gaps. So here I'm helping leaders identify missing voices. Who isn't at the table? Who's at the table, and do you know what their interests are? Exploring past decisions that left wounds in the organization or in people, encouraging leaders to acknowledge history before asking for buy in on new initiatives, right? Understanding the culture of an organization, and so some of the tactics I use for closing those gaps or things that may come up in a session or over time, publicly naming the gap and committing to repair it, right, is one way to do that. Creating opportunities for input early, not after decisions are made, and helping people understand where to let go, where to let people in to those conversations, having enough trust that you can let people into those conversations, and then following up to show how input shaped outcomes. Um, can I tell you a quick story?
Sure, absolutely, please.
So I think about a time when I was at UC Riverside, right? This was during COVID, return to campus at work. We're building trust. We're, required not just to fix technical fixes to the classrooms, but we were working on active listening sessions to surface fears, to demonstrate responsiveness. And there was a lot of, in my role where I was vice provost and dean of undergraduate education, there were a lot of decisions that I had to make, but it was the team that I had around me, the folks who were in charge of the Center for Teaching and Learning, who were fairly new to that university at that time, but really had a pulse of what folks needed. And so we came up with a couple of programs where we were able to help our stakeholders ease back into new technological advancements that we had created to bring people in. There was a chancellor at the time who, and I'm sure the chancellor now is committed to student success. Kim Wilcox was definitely committed to student success and really gave us the agency to have conversations, deep conversations that would help us bring back both the faculty, the staff, and the students in a positive way. So, it starts with that trust and being able to have the agency and authority to speak up and share things that, maybe the senior leadership team hasn't seen. And so that they gave me the agency to do that.
Well, it hasn't seen, or sometimes, you feel like some institutions they don't want to see, they don't want to hear. It always reminds me of the three monkeys, right? Um, what you just said so very closely aligns with my work that I've done on agile transformation in higher ed, which is exactly the same thing, asking the question, who has the finger on the pulse of what actually needs to happen? Who knows what change is most impactful? Because when you look at, executive leaders, they may look at one way of affecting change, but either it won't arrive at the front lines where it's really needed, or it's going to be misconstrued or misdirected and so forth. I had a conversation recently with Joel Perez, who wrote Dear White Leader, and familiar with that, a great conversation. And at the very end of our conversation, he said or gave me a term or mentioned a term that I hadn't considered. We talked about underserved communities, which of course has the diversity aspect. And he said, well, he starts using the term underappreciated communities. And that made
Yes.
a light bulb go off. It's like, yes, because that's what we have on campus. We have a lot of communities that have nothing to do with traditional concepts of diversity, but they're just not appreciated for their actual institutional knowledge because they sit at the offices in the small departments and they interact with students. They might process paperwork, all these kind of things. And one thing that I also appreciate you saying is you talked about authenticity and vulnerability, which of course requires a culture where authenticity and vulnerability and psychological safety is not just tolerated, but expected. And I think that is a big obstacle to change a lot of times because you can have a leader who comes in and they say, "You can trust me, and I want to hear what you all have to say." But then it's one of those, annual climate surveys with a response rate of 8%, and then nothing ever happens anyway. So, Jennifer, I think this is a great time to kind of pivot to the question of change. I mean, we talked about trust, and of course, trust is not something you can just generate and declare by decree. So, there's a lot of work that has to happen. But I think a lot of people who work in higher ed, either as directly as faculty or staff, or then also as coaches, I think they would all agree that change is sometimes glacially slow to happen in higher ed. So, what is your experience with helping your clients open the door and kind of maybe crack that door open a little bit so that meaningful change can actually happen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. And I think some of this is about building blocks, everything that we've talked about before, uh, being authentic, creating space for people to be seen and heard. All of these things are an escalation to having change actually accepted. I think within higher ed, some of this is about protection of values and of traditions, professional identity. And what I try to do is help leaders ask what's at stake for those resisting. Let's work through, let's begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say. Let's think about our stakeholders and what they are protecting. What are they afraid of losing? And I think also this is about, people are comfortable with the status quo, and there are all types of dynamics, right? From staff folks who are like, hey, I've seen so many leaders rotate out. You have a change initiative, I'll just wait you out, right? I'll just wait you out until, the new person comes along. Or, sometimes I'm probably telling secrets, but, sometimes there's the search committee who wants the new leader to come in and do all of these things. And although the hiring manager has okayed or approved this position description, the hiring authority actually wants this person to come in and do something totally different. Or there might be a concentric circle of alignment, but there's more, how do I say this? There's less of what the position profile has said, and there's never really an articulation of, now that you're here, here are the wonderful things that I need you to do, right? Or sometimes, I think about change. We always talk about people who are coming in external to the university, and they might have been from a place that has accomplished, a lot as an institution, and they're coming in and the classic mistake, well, at such and such university, we used to do this, right? Which is a sure way of people to resist. But throughout all of these different examples, I think, the number one thing is that people go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's a need for safety. And status quo at times equals safety, right? So people want to protect, um, that safety component. Sometimes they don't know what's on the other side. They can't imagine what's on the other side. And it also depends on the hierarchy and bureaucracy, the levels of each of those within an institution. So, one of the things that we talk about is, have you engendered trust? Do people feel like they can work with you and share insights? Because all of this is going to be needed in the change process, right? And so treating resistance as information, not obstruction, really being open to understanding what's happening when people are resisting. And sometimes this is maybe not the best analogy, but I will use it. We've always heard that a broke clock is right twice a day. So even if you
Yeah.
believe that a detractor or someone who might be a saboteur may be out against you or is trying to sabotage the change process, there is some truth in they're saying, right? And so opening up and hearing what people are saying and working on strategy And I'm not saying to go against that person, but just thinking about all of the inputs, not just the ones that steer you towards where you want to go. I also talk to people about using empathy to surface underlying concerns. Why are folks, afraid, or why do folks not want to move towards whatever this is? Sometimes it's because they're afraid there's not going to be enough training, or they're going to be expected to do something, and the stakes are unfair because no one has really helped them to move along. And going back to the example I used at UC Riverside, during the pandemic, we went from Blackboard to Canvas while online, completely online. And then we modernized 110 general assignment classrooms. And it was the Center for Teaching and Learning director who came up with this fabulous idea. Let's create a grad assistantship where grad students could come in and help faculty adjust to going back with this new technology, right? So sometimes it's thinking about when we get to the other side, what will they need to be successful? I also share really quickly co creating solutions that honor core values while moving forward is going to be important. So I think all of these things contribute to an ecosystem where folks are hesitant to move. But what I'm trying to do is help the leaders disentangle what is it about their specific situation in their context, in their campus university culture, and work through that in ways that they can see change, and they can use the detractors and the folks who are maybe in the middle on the fence. How can we bring them along?
Well, every institution is so unique. I mean, all institutions are somewhat similar, but still they're very similar. Just like, or they're very unique. Just like leadership is contextual, right? So you need to take all these things into account. Again, there's so much to unpack, but I took a couple of notes here. When I look at a complex organization, I sometimes liken that to a 20-foot cotton ball because you have a lot of people in it, and basically the organization is not the org chart. The organization is people who have relationships with each other, who collaborate, sometimes work against each other, all these silos who have certain needs, certain expectations, ambitions, aspirations, and so forth. So it's highly complex. But what happens if you take a big boxing glove and you box into a 20-foot cotton ball? Nothing. You fist is going to go in, you're going to put it out, and maybe the whole thing shakes a little bit, but nothing is going to happen, really. So that's, I think, when people come in and because of their ego, because of aspirations for leaving a great legacy, they implement these massive changes top down without having everybody on board. That stuff either destroys, rips the whole thing apart, but doesn't really move the system. So I think
Yeah.
that is one of the things that we're understanding the complexity of an organization as a people-driven complexity, and not it's not a machine. It's not a machinery that where you could just take out parts and just replace them and thinks you can fix something. So you can only nudge the whole thing. And thank you also for reminding us that resistance is information. That is
Yes.
something that I've used with a client as well, where they were always kind of complaining, well, this person is always against. It's like, well, what if you use this resistance, exactly what you said, as information? What information can you draw from that? And here I just kind of need to be a little selfish and pitch an article that I wrote. It's called Of Black Sheep and Other Important People, because I think we have a lot of people who are labeled black sheep in our organizations because they speak up. They might be difficult, but you still might want to listen to them. And if they do
Yes.
it because they really believe in the organization and really making a difference, and they do it out of a real conviction, then I think you definitely want their voice to be heard as well. So as I mean, change doesn't happen all of a sudden, and it's rainbows and unicorns. But I mean, there might be some small wins, but there are always some setbacks, things that don't work out. And I'm wondering, how have you helped leaders develop resilience when there are setbacks, when things don't quite go as they need to go, and also resilience not just for themselves but also to keep their teams motivated for those who are the actual change makers on the ground.
So first of all, Tim, you have the best questions. You have the best questions. So thank you. Thanks for asking that question. I think really when we think about resilience, change in higher education is rarely a linear process, right? Um, Setbacks are going to be inevitable. And I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice to think that we're going to say, here's the new initiative or here's the rollout and, everybody go. And it works perfectly. I have never seen it that way. And if you have seen it, please let me know. So,
I have
yeah,
not.
exactly. So, yeah. So, what we're looking for is, again, going back to what we talked about before, looking at it as a learning opportunity, right? So, reframing the setback as a learning opportunity and readjusting and thinking about what is missing, uh, what did we not account for that is coming up now, and how do we add that into the strategy? I think another way to do this is anchor leaders in their why, their purpose, and their values. And you have no idea, I'm sure you do this as well, the number of people that I coach that I have to talk about. Um, you have to explain your why. You just have to, and you have to do it in a way that's going to resonate with different folks who receive information in different ways. And so this is going to be verbally and sharing information and recall and helping people understand, but that is important for them to continue to focus. Oftentimes when we do have those setbacks, people throw up their hands and they're like, see, told you it wasn't going to work, or I was just waiting for the blip to happen. And, we have to be strong and share. Here's why we continue to go forward. Here's why, the president, provost, whoever it is, the VP for student affairs, the auxiliary person. Here's why we continue to believe in this particular initiative. And this is what it's going to help do for our campus, right? Or for our college or whatever unit. And then identifying trusted support networks. So, whether that's mentors or whether that's peers or coaches, there's something about perspective and also having a good sounding board, someone to help you think through. And oftentimes in these roles, it's lonely, right? So you have to process and think and anticipate by yourself. And so having the ability to talk through strategy or think about what am I missing is going to be important. So when leaders stay grounded and transparent during adversity, they signal steadiness and it deepens the trust across the institution, right? You did not bail at the first setback. So I often share with clients that resilience isn't about never stumbling, it's actually learning to recover quickly. It's keeping perspective and it's carrying others forward during that uncertainty.
So it's really a reinforcing dynamic, what you're describing. What I wrote down here is transparency plus empathy, and I think this is something that
Yeah.
is uncomfortable for some leaders because I'm thinking like a large state institution that is so siloed, where everybody kind of retreats to their functional role and authority and thinks that ties them to leadership and so forth. So to suddenly offer transparency and also a willingness to listen and maybe change their perspective and change their views by listening to somebody who is 8 levels below them on the org chart. I think that is something that
Yeah.
is deeply uncomfortable to some leaders. Um, and you also mentioned, it's not just about communicating your why, but it's also communicate your why in a way that resonates with different stakeholders. So I think this is where you need some linguistic agility because,
Yes.
as you know, I mean, different people in different parts of campus speak differently. They have different needs. If you come in with a bunch of business talk to some administrators in a department, they're going to just look at you, roll their eyes, and say, yeah, whatever. right? But again, when you talk to the to the board or the governing board or whatever, that's a very different story. But what it all seems to boil down to is really leveraging colleges and universities as learning organizations, which, funny enough, you would think that they are, but they don't operate like learning organizations. And here again is something where I think the where my agile work um, kind of starts coming up when you're saying this, is this idea of not creating some kind of 10-year change plan, because we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, but to actually implement meaningful change in small increments, and by asking the people who actually are on the front lines, who know what really needs to happen for
Yeah.
change to take effect and have the greatest impact, and then just try small things, get a small win, see how that works. And if it doesn't work, well, we haven't lost that much. But if it does work, great, let's build on that, right? But it's like a very, very different kind of strategic thinking that I think a lot of leaders are maybe uncomfortable with, or at least are unfamiliar with. So, Jennifer, to kind of wrap things up, if you were to give coaches who are watching our conversation, listening to it, some actionable advice on how to potentially spot trust issues, because they're not always, you know, uh, um, obvious, and then how best to address them so that their clients are better equipped to actually enact the change that they want to enact. What advice would you give them?
Oh, that's a great question. Once again, so I just think about reiterating, as we all know, that coaching is a safe space, right? And thinking about the layers of loneliness in these positions. The leaders are often isolated, they're caught between boards and faculty and external stakeholders. And as we all know, coaching gives them a place where they don't have to posture, right? Um, and I also think about just the process of helping folks through resilience, and it being central to the narrative that trust is not just built in good times, but it's built in how leaders recover from mistakes and setbacks. And oftentimes as coaches, I think I've just had a team of clients, and they had all of these different challenges, and it's easy for, as coaches, for us to fall into, oh, I just got to, make sure that they see progress. And of course, we want to see them go from A to B, or from, C to F. But we oftentimes also have to slow down, right? And remind ourselves, as well as the leaders, that trust isn't destroyed by a single misstep. And the opportunity for us to slow down and listen and help them rebuild, I think that's going to be, core to what we do. Because I think we all want to see change, positivity, a measurable step from A to B, but there will be setbacks. And I think how we help people through those setbacks is one of the greatest gifts that we can give as coaches.
And I think using setbacks and mishaps as an opportunity to build trust by acknowledging the fact that things just didn't go right. I think the worst that a leader can do in that case, just to dig in their heels and say, well, that was by design. Well, no, it wasn't. You just didn't listen. But then to say, well, this didn't go as planned, but I think this is why. So let's try to do it differently. And I really appreciate you bringing up this. You called it layers of loneliness. I have to. I think I'm going to write that on a sticky note and put it on my wall, because you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's funny when you work with institutional leaders and you're just there to listen to them when they know that you're not going to judge them. You have no expectation. You're just there for them to kind of work through whatever they need to work through. There, I mean, I had this one leader, and he almost got choked up when I said, "Listen, I'm not here to judge you." It's like, whatever. I'm just there for you. I'm just here to listen. He said, "Really?" It's like, yeah, it's all right. It's all good. So having compassion and empathy
Yes.
for the leaders as well, I think is important because they're also people. And I think this is something, when you work with mid-level managers, for example, to also remind them, have a little bit of compassion, a little empathy for your leaders because they need it. They need a little bit of TLC as well. So,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. Well, Jennifer, listen, this has been a pleasure, and I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation. I think we need to continue this. There's so much more to unpack, and I hope our listeners and viewers will agree. So thank you so much for taking the time, Jennifer, to sharing your wisdom and your experience. You will definitely have to be back, and we will definitely have to continue this
Oh, thank you.
conversation.
It would be my pleasure.
And to all of you watching and listening, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us today. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support really means the world to us. And if you're interested in some more information about our guest, about our topic, and some more information in general, some more resources, please visit our companion website, which is higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. See you next time and keep making a difference, one client and one conversation at a time. Take care.